Hello, everyone. And I have to correct an issue here. I'm putting Tony on this side. I'm putting him, actually, yes, now that we are, as if we are facing a car, you are in the British driving position because, because
Or
not
the
only,
Australian driving position. Yep.
that's right. And it is also the position that we all should have been driving in because that's the position we were in on horse-drawn wagons. So why that was changed in certain countries baffles me to this day. Either way. So, the reason I'm putting you in the driving seat for this, not literally the driving seat, but symbolically, is because to everyone who doesn't know, we were supposed to do Platoon. And I had an OCD physical media collector moment where I told Tony, I said, hey, can we wait a few weeks to do that one? Because the 4K is coming out and I'd really like to watch it 4K before War Stories. And Tony, I assume, rolled his eyes behind the internet and was like, all right, sure. So we have chosen Waterloo thanks to Tony's deep wealth of war movie knowledge. And it was also one I'd never seen, but I couldn't wait. And I imported my UK limited edition Blu-ray set just for this screening. And so we're going to be talking about the 1970 film Waterloo. Tony, how long have you been aware of this movie?
I think I've always, it's one of those things I've probably always been aware of. This is the type of film that my dad really likes to watch. You know, he's Zulu to him was what Star Wars was to me. So leading on from Zulu, it was all of these kinds of films. But for some strange reason, I never watched Waterloo until literally this week. I had never seen it. So I've always been aware of it. It certainly reflects in my dad's toy soldier collection. He has a lot of those types of soldiers in his collection, along with a lot of Zulu War stuff and other things. But yeah, I sat down this week to watch Waterloo for the first time, and it was unexpected, somewhat confusing.
Yeah.
It's an interesting film, and I think we've got a lot to discuss tonight.
We do. For those of you who aren't aware of Waterloo, the premise of this, it's one of those big day and date epic kind of war films that really tries to recreate a moment in history that's around a battle. So when I say day and date, I mean, like, I think we've talked about this before, Tony. There were those films in the 60s that dominated with the who, why, when, where thing, where they kind of did a textbook play like The Longest Day or Tora, 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 or later on in 77, A Bridge Too Far, where they said, we're going to follow this operation and try and capture all the moving parts. This is that for the Battle of Waterloo, which for those of you who aren't purveyors of history, this is the final big battle between Napoleon and the rest of Europe, where they were finally like, we're going to finally deal with this little corporal. And that is really the short version of it, although this film has two cuts, but I couldn't find both cuts. I only have the one that's just over 2 hours. There's another one apparently that's like 134 minutes. And I only saw that on IMDb and Wikipedia. I don't have that on my set. So I need to look into that a little more. Let me just knock out some super chats here real quick. Brian Dillingham, thank you for the super chat. He says, in honor of the British square, here are a few American rectangles. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
And then we have Jim Largo. Thank you for the super chat. He says, wait a minute. This isn't a musical starring ABBA. I really need to get out more. In all seriousness, I love these live streams. Definitely learning about some great cinema and a few turkeys. That's right. I appreciate you saying that. And we have a bunch of people in the house right now, including Keith Knight, who I think is going to be instrumental and invaluable in this particular stream. I just have this feeling he's going to be a huge help. M. Vargo, thank you for the super chat. He says, cheers to the return of War Stories. And cheers to you, sir.
Yes, sir.
It jumped a little bit on me, but we are caught up. All right. So, Tony, I looked up a little bit of information about this movie production-wise. I don't know if you did as well, but I
did, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, before we even start talking about the plot, all right, we've got Dino De Laurentiis producing this film, wanting to make this masterwork that he wanted to do back in the mid 60s. I would say, if I was a guessing person, I would say he saw how hot these types of movies are. Longest Day, Tora, 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 all these kind of things. And he said, I got to get in on this. But he couldn't get everything put together. He wanted John Huston to direct. And then by the time he got everything kind of lined up, he realized how big this film was going to be, and he pulled an interesting move. Did you read that in your notes about who he went to help finance this thing?
Not the financing, no.
Oh, the Russians?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
The reason I actually even looked into any of the kind of behind the scenes production stuff, first of as I was starting, I got like 20 minutes into the film and I was like, what was this film's budget?
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of money up on the screen. The production value is off the charts here.
Yeah.
But also, again, only about 20 minutes into the film, I started thinking, this looks and feels like an Italian, like a spaghetti. There are filming techniques and things used, and the cinematography reminded me of spaghetti westerns. And I'm like, this is very odd in a way.
Yeah.
So I started looking into it, and I was like, this is a joint production between Italy and the Soviet Union.
Just
a film about the English and the French, made by the Italians and the Soviet Union.
Yeah. It's the English with the help of the Prussians and the Belgians fighting the French, but produced by an Italian and then really brought to life by the Soviet Union, which is just like, I don't even know how to process that. 15,000 Soviet soldiers were brought in to be trained as the various soldiers in this film. Like because I've got shots in here that everyone, you'll be able to see. The scope of the final 40 minutes of this movie is unbelievable. Like, it's mind-blowing. Like, it literally is a cast of tens of thousands all on the screen at the same time. This was before any digital effects, and this was also when filmmakers took pride in not even having optical effects. So like, this particular filmmaker was clearly, him and Dino De Laurentiis were like, no, this is going to be like Spartacus. We're not going to have one optical composite or anything in this movie. It's all going to be in camera. The filmmaking style of it really reminded me of Cromwell in the way they shot those battles. It was around the same time. But one of the things that blew me away, and we're going to get to the clips, guys, and we're going to start talking about the story, was that the Soviet Union's involvement or cooperation with this film involved them changing the topography of like 5 square miles of the Ukraine to mimic the battle site at Waterloo, which I'm going, wait, what? So they bulldozed down 2 massive hills, planted a forest, built an entire like farmhouse setup or something in 3 dimensions, so you could shoot it from all, they really just recreated the buildings, recreated every piece of topography that they could get their hands on in the record books. And you're going, now historians have said not everything is exact, but I'm going, right, but going to this length, I'm sure this is going to get closer than any other film ever will before or since. And the results are staggering. Like, but we'll get to that. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay, so we start with, and really the first 2/3 of the film is a character study between us learning about Napoleon and us learning about Wellington. I feel like that's a safe kind of way to describe that. For those of you that don't know much about the Napoleonic era, let me refer you to 2 board games. This movie could be called Risk the Movie, or it could be called Stratego the Movie. It like, the whole aesthetic is, if you've played those 2 board games, that's the time period we're in, 1815. You're talking about cavalry and dragoons and all those kind of soldiers with the big tall hats with the short brims and the big emblazoned livery on the front, and the big white ammo sashes with the bayonets and that kind of thing.
Yeah, lots of red, white, blue, gold, shoulder pads.
Yeah.
This film, I believe, from what I read, still to this day holds the record for the largest cast of costumed extras. As you said, 15,000 Russian soldiers. It still holds the record for the largest costumed extra cast.
It would have to. It would have to. And the thing that blows my mind is I'm going, wait a second. Of the 15,000, did they say, okay, you 5,000 are English, you 5,000 are French, and you 5,000 are Prussian? Because I would think that would be the only way to economize the whole cast, because you wouldn't want to have to make, in other words, you wouldn't want to have to make 3,000 Prussian costumes and have some of the guys playing Englishmen change out into Prussians every now and then for other pickup shots. I would think you'd just have them split 3 ways, and you'd have 5 camera units trying to shoot everything you needed so that it would take less than 5 years to get all this done. I mean, just mind-blowing. Also, the amount of horses, holy crap. Like
that was the other thing that occurred to me with the horses. Because I had read that bit of information prior to finishing the film. Like 15,000 costumed extras, and then you see the amount of cavalry that's on camera, and I'm thinking, in 1970, not many armed forces around the world were still using horses. So how many of these guys had to be trained on horseback? Or are there just a lot of horseback riders in the Soviet army? I don't know.
It is beyond comprehension, really.
Yeah.
Keith Knight sent us a super chat here, but I'm having trouble finding it so I can bring it up on screen. So let me, here it is, found it. Great to see you back. Surprisingly, I've never seen this film, so I'm looking forward to this one. I'm not an expert by any means. Keith, that does legitimately surprise me, but it also scares me because it means I feel like we are now twisting in the wind here. So this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, Keith, you're supposed to be our backup, Keith. Come
on. All right, so everybody, here's how the movie begins. We start with Napoleon at the end of his first attempt to take over Europe. In other words, his generals have come to him and said, everybody in Europe hates you. They're all at your back door, and you need to abdicate and go to the island of Elba. It's your only option.
Yep.
And what the production value in this movie is immediately on screen from the moment those generals are walking through that French palace to his chamber. The costuming is on point. The one thing that I did find odd, and I have to assume that it was some sort of historical accuracy that I'm just not familiar with, but in the room they're standing in, as they talk to Napoleon, who's played by Rod Steiger, brilliantly by Rod Steiger. Yeah. Did you notice that all the paintings, the chandeliers, and the chairs were all covered in like dust protective mosquito netting?
Yes, I did. And what I want to assume is that was it was a real location. It was some grand palace in Italy, you know. It must have been part of the deal. It's like, yeah, you can film here, but we've got to protect all of these rich pieces of art.
That's what I was thinking too. I was like, is this some sort of on-location caveat they had to make? Or is it possible that back in the day when they had when those big rooms were unused, in order to minimize the cleaning duties, they would cover certain things to protect chairs and paintings and whatnot? I'm like, would they though? I mean, I guess maybe they would. I mean, I've been to Hampton Court. I've been to a number of others, and there are a lot of big empty rooms that I would imagine people don't want to have to clean every week. So, but I don't know. I looked it up to try and figure it out, but that no answers were forthcoming. So just a little point on that. So there's this moment where you might recognize Dan O'Herlihy. He's in it as one of Napoleon's generals. You guys might know him better as the head of OCP in RoboCop as a much older man. I know him best from the TV show Colditz, which we're going to have to get to at some point, Tony, because that's a great show.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not trying to goad you. I'm simply saying, Colditz is great. Lester, thank you so much for the super chat. He says, one for RetroBlasting, your payday. Thank you so much, Lester. Very, very kind. So they say, look, you've got to abdicate, or else the French people are sunk, because right now they're not going to blame the French people, they're blaming you. And he's like, this is what happens when they keep goading him.
I can't believe my ears.
You all stand before me waving a piece of paper, crying, abdicate, abdicate. I will not! I will not!
So for those of you that maybe haven't picked up on this yet, it's historically never a good idea to be drawn into the charisma of somebody who then says, go kill for me. It usually doesn't end well. Rod Steiger's performance, Tony, I mean, it really is it's Rod Steiger, but it's a brilliant performance on top of it being Rod Steiger. I mean, I couldn't believe how effective it was right from the first. What you saw right there, guys, is like the first 2 minutes of the movie. And
yeah, and one of the notes I wrote down here was the amount of acting that Rod Steiger does in this film with his hands. He conveys so much that there's actually a lot of close-up shots of what he's doing with his hands throughout this film.
Yeah.
But I kind of think back, and he was probably an unusual casting choice prior to the finished product.
Yeah.
You know, I think beforehand you would have think Rod Steiger is a French emperor, like
right.
The monster of Europe. It didn't really, but he pulled it off.
Yeah, he really did. I was sold on him as Napoleon within 3 minutes. I was just like, oh, okay, it's on now. And Lester, thank you so much. He says, one for Analog Toys, your payday.
Thank you, Lester.
Well, we then have this moment where they do convince him. He walks out of the room right after that moment, but he comes back in because he realizes he really doesn't have a choice, because he's just found out that his last best hope was an army contingent of soldiers that surrendered. He just gets the message that this group has surrendered. So he literally has nobody left to fight his cause. So he decides to sign the letter and abdicate. And I can only show a very brief moment of this, but he comes out of the building where all of his men are standing in formation at attention, and he addresses them.
Soldiers, after 20 years, I have come to say goodbye.
I honestly don't think and I say this as somebody who'd never seen this movie before, so I got no nostalgia goggles for this film at all. I don't think I've seen a performance where it really, the guy really was trying to hold back bawling. Like, he really was trying not to cry. Like, there was and I'm just going, geez, this guy could act his way through anything. I mean, like, I was sold. I was sold the whole time.
Yeah, and obviously the character of Napoleon is not exactly an endearing character. You know,
right.
He was the monster of Europe. But it was that scene there, which is very early on in the film. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I'm invested in this character now. It was. I'm really glad you had that clip ready to go, because that was the scene where I was like, this is the despite whatever Napoleon had done or is going to do henceforth from here, he's been humanized by this actor, and he did a fantastic job at doing that.
Yeah. I've just learned that my computer, when I was loading up these clips, StreamYard did that fancy thing where it's like, hey, guess what? I'm going to sneak by you and not upload certain clips. So I've just realized that my next clip is not uploaded. So let me get this going here. But in the meantime, don't tell me my password is incorrect. Everyone's embarrassing me in front of my audience today. It's Napoleon as a personality has always eluded me in my historical studies, because when I say eluded, I don't mean that I didn't study him. I mean that when I did study Napoleon, I never could quite get a read on who he was, what he was all about, like what his personality was. And I get that the Napoleonic era is its own intense area of interest, you know, like, but I know that he was a conqueror like Alexander the Great. I know he was an upstart in many ways because he wasn't part of the, you know, the royalty. He was, you know, that was during the French nation's troubled times where they were having revolution after revolution and things were just crazy. So this really was kind of a learning curve for me watching this. I mean, I've seen Napoleon as a cameo in other things, like fictional things like the Count of Monte Cristo and stuff, but I've never really watched a Napoleon focused film before. And Alejandro says, keep in mind that the idea of Napoleon being short is British propaganda. There's no need to do all caps. We're all friends here. He was average height for his era. Yeah, I'm sure that's true. So yeah. So then we come to, and it's very difficult for me to couch what I'm about to say next. And this is why I'm so mad that I have to now re-upload this clip, because of course it leaves out the clip that I really wanted to talk about. So stand by, everyone. I'm going to force StreamYard to bend to my will, but I have to do it on this computer because that's where my editing stuff is, because I like to complicate everything. We're going to enter this studio here and do the yada, yada, yada. And then I'm going to,
while Michael's doing that, I'll rescue you with a brief anecdote. So I'm sitting here with I've got my laptop in front of me, talking to Michael on StreamYard, and I can see the chat in StreamYard, but I always like to watch the chat in YouTube. So I've got my phone going there. So I had the phone going there at the same time, and the moment that this show went live, my YouTube notification popped up on the screen and went, RetroBlasting is now live. And I'm like, that's great, because normally it tells me 30 minutes after the show started. So maybe they're starting to get some stuff right.
Okay. And it's there we go. There we go. So I should see it in here now. And here it is. So for everybody who doesn't care about history or who's never seen this film, I need to turn this off now because I don't want MacGyver being seen the whole time. All right, so that's, hold on. I'm going to make sure I have all my clips now because I don't want to do this again. 5, 6, see, it was like, no, I need 7 is what I need. 7. Okay. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Okay, now we're good. So as soon as that's done, I'll be able to turn that off. For all of you out there who are fans of Transformers, what I'm about to say will mean something to you, okay? He abdicates. He gets in his little carriage and he leaves for the island of Elba. That means that King Louis XVIII can be reinstated to the throne. Louis XVIII in this film, albeit briefly, is played by none other than Orson Welles. Let that sink in, Transformers fans. Unicron is playing Louis XVIII. Now, I'm going to say goodbye to Richard Dean Anderson and turn off this background noise here. Shut down. Thank you. I did not know how big of a part Louis XVIII would play in these events. He didn't play much of a role at all, turns out, which makes sense as to why they were able to afford Orson Welles and bring him in and do all this with him. He has a very brief scene, and I know we've already talked about Rod Steiger just being this amazing actor. Orson Welles is only on screen for a biscuit minute, and he is captivating in his lines. I mean, like, the guy just knew how to hold a presence on screen. Like, he just knew, even though, you know, he's, by this time in his life, he's as big as the boulder in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And, you know, he's got that presence. Like, he just knows it. Brilliant bit of casting. So for those of you who need to be brought up to speed here, one of Napoleon's generals, played by Dan O'Herlihy, went back and became a loyalist to the crown after the king was reinstated. He is now one of the king's generals. And they are all brought in because there is an alert that's gone out that Napoleon has escaped the island of Elba. They don't show his escape. They literally just cut from him going to Elba to then saying 10 months later. And then they're running into the king's chamber and they're like, he's escaped. He's got 1,000 men. He's going to come. He's going to start tearing, shit up. And they're like, what do we do, sire? What do we do, your majesty? And the king starts assigning people things to do. He's sitting in his chair with his ladies in waiting or whatever. He's sitting in his chair and he's reading this newspaper. And he looks over and he assigns one of the generals to do such and such. I can't remember what he says. And then he looks at Dan O'Herlihy and he says, you once loved this man, didn't you? And he's like, yeah. And he says this with no malice and no cunning, by the way. He's not being mischievous or insidious or anything like that. He's just being very base. And he says, you once loved this man, didn't you? And Dan O'Herlihy says, yes, I did, sire, for a time. And he's like, well, I need you to go bring this man back. I need you to go stop him. Confront him, stop him, bring him back. And Dan O'Herlihy looks at him and he says, I promise you that I will bring him back in an iron cage. And then he goes walking off. And I've edited this together a little bit because there's a lot of camera shots in this that linger on faces to give you that emotional build and let you read the performance. But obviously YouTube won't let us do that. So I've cut this down. So you're going to hear what Dan O'Herlihy says before he walks out. And then I cut immediately to Orson Welles' reaction. And it's gold.
But I promise your majesty I'll bring him back to Paris in an iron cage.
How they exaggerate all this. The soldiers. In an iron cage. Nobody asked for that.
I mean, I know that people watching movies today are like, where's the explosion? But I really, really love character studies like this. I think it's so, and especially with a guy of his talent, where he's like, in an iron cage. And then he does that little, like he's showing you that this guy is thinking, but he's also an effete, monarch and all this kind of stuff as only the French could produce. And I just thought it was a brilliant moment. Tony, were you am I just overplaying this, or were you shocked as well to see Orson Welles in the credits?
No, unfortunately, because I got a few minutes into the movie when I wanted to go and look up all the production history, I saw the name there, and I'm thinking, who's Orson Welles going to play?
Right.
And then when he appears, you've got to also give credit to the costume designer and the makeup, because he doesn't. You can tell it's Orson Welles from the voice, but you don't immediately from first seeing him go, oh, that's Orson Welles.
Right.
The wig and everything. And it's brilliant bit of casting there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Keith Knight, thank you for the super chat. He says, useless related fact. Napoleon's nephew, Napoleon III, became a special constable in the Metropolitan Police in London in 1848. Well, it just goes to show you that just because one person in your family can't get it together, it doesn't mean everybody in your family's lousy. So that's great. Now we come to the moment where Dan O'Herlihy and his army, I can't remember his name, it's General something. I'm calling him Dan O'Herlihy because that's who he is. Confronts Napoleon's 1,000 men as they're coming back up through France. He's going to stop him in his tracks, and remember, take him back in an iron cage. And Napoleon gets within several hundred yards of him or whatever it is. And all of O'Herlihy's French loyal men pull up their muskets. And as a reflex, Napoleon's men pull up their muskets. And what you were saying, Tony, just a few minutes ago about the focus on hands, I was so fascinated by this moment that I took a brief clip from it. I edited some of it together, but Napoleon immediately, because he's seeing his friend General Dan O'Hurley. He's seeing, that's not his real name. He's seeing his friend. He's seeing his friend again after 10 months as a general for the royalty. But instead of acting emotional, crazy, malicious, even though we've just seen him blow his top about, abdicating the throne, he tells all of his men to put their muskets down. And then it just focuses on his hands. It's fascinating. And it lingers on that I had to cut into the shot. It follows the hand the whole way down.
Yeah.
And then it holds on it for quite a while. And you say to yourself, wow, like I was saying to myself, this is a very well filmed movie. Like clearly the screenwriters had some real vision for how they wanted this to all play out. The part I didn't get was because I couldn't find a way to edit it properly, because it's such a not a battle of wills, but two men, former friends, reading each other's thoughts and minds. Napoleon then looks at General Dan O'Hurley and he says, he's looking at Dan O'Hurley's men and he just says, look, if you want to shoot your emperor, go ahead. I won't stop you. Shoot your emperor. And you see the guys all real nervous, and one of them faints from the tension. One of the musket wielding guys just like, oh, and he just can't handle it. The thought of shooting Napoleon. And so then Dan O'Hurley offers him his sword as a sign of surrender, and Napoleon picks it up and gives it back to him as Dan O'Hurley's entire contingent literally just turns its guns up in the air, and they all join Napoleon in like this raucous kind of.
Yep.
Anybody in the chat, is that how it went down? Like, did he literally walk through France just re-picking up all of his loyal followers as he went? I assume he knew that that's what was probably going to happen, so he was going to have a pretty good army by the time he got to where he wanted to go. I don't know.
The power of personality and reputation, and it was someone that these people had, they had lived through that time. They had learned so much about him, and it would be. It's difficult for us to I suppose try and imagine these in the modern era where with social media and 24-hour network news and all of this kind of stuff, the facade of personality can very easily be broken down, but it wasn't the case back then. Anyone who was written about in publications, probably the closest thing you'd get today would be, imagine an army being faced with, Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
Do you really want to be the guy who kills Brad Pitt?
Right. I don't want to go down in
you're going to get on social media.
Yeah. I don't want to be the guy that's known for killing Tom Hanks, or something like that.
Yeah.
It is amazing how much charisma the guy had, and it also makes you wonder how he was able to even get cornered into the position he was in 10 months prior, where he had to abdicate. You would think a guy with that level of command would never have found himself there, but that's the way history played out in the broad stroke. So then we finally cut to a big British ball that is taking place in Brussels, and it is a big evening gala, and this is where we finally meet Lord Wellington, Christopher Plummer, who I believe is either just coming off of or just about to start working on Battle of Britain. Like, this is the same year. It might have been a year before, but it's in the same 12-month period where he did both of these movies. And again, cast of hundreds in this room. Costumes.
Yeah, one of the notes I wrote down here is for people like you and I can very much consume I found this movie. It's 2 hours 13 minutes. It felt like a 3-hour movie. I found parts of it to be quite a slog.
Right.
But I can sit down and consume a much older film like this and appreciate cinematography, costume, and get fascinated by that. But a modern audience, I think, would really struggle with something like that. Modern movies, certainly on this kind of scale, they have to have a set piece every 10 to 15 minutes. And one of the notes I wrote down is in the first hour and a half of this film, the only set piece is a ballroom dance.
Yes, very much
the
so.
The only thing that it would even come close to what I would call a set piece.
Yeah.
Stieglitz
says this is pretty much how it went down according to Bourrienne and various other accounts. And Keith Knight says the majority of the French army were volunteers who were proud to serve such a general as Napoleon. Their loyalty was unwavered. Well, between you two guys, I can definitely believe it, like as far as what you're describing and what I saw on screen. There's this moment at the I took note of it because there's a little bit of a preamble before Wellington arrives, makes his entrance, and you see the youngest soldiers, or the youngest officers, I should say, making eyes at some of the young women in the dance. And the Scottish guys are doing this dance around their claymores. They're doing this kind of Scottish demonstration dance. And then Wellington comes in. And at first I was confused because if they had said his name, I got lost in the din. And I didn't bother to look up who was playing who in the movie before I started watching it, because I just try and give a movie its chance to, wash over me. The way Christopher Plummer's character talks about the British soldiers at first, I swore he was like a Duke of Brussels. I swore he was like somebody who was like a Belgian, aristocrat or something like that. I thought, is this guy one of the British dudes? And I have the clip here because I was like, but here we go.
They're the salt of England, Arthur.
Scum. Nothing but beggars and scoundrels. All of them. Gin is the spirit of their patriotism.
Yet you expect them to die for you?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, jeez, what the hell? I don't want to go so far as to say this is the type of film where there are character arcs. And I don't want to say that that's not a knock against this film either, because this genre of movie, what I call the when, where, why, and how war film, which was popular in the 60s through the mid 70s, didn't concern itself with trying to build in character arcs. In other words, a movie that would have been made during this time about the Titanic wouldn't have had a romance involved. Like, it would have just simply been, we're going to try and depict what happened. And for that, I salute the film, just the facts, ma'am, kind of thing. But it does give us some color here. Like, there's a kind of, we're establishing how the privileged officers feel about their enlisted men, and what that relationship looks like. And then, of course, there's a moment here where their daughter comes up and introduces them to the young officer she's been making eyes at, that she's obviously hoping will be a man in his future, or a man in her future. And that's going to become kind of a minor subplot that runs throughout, which I have a few more clips from later. But yeah, you're right, Tony. This is really the only set piece in the movie that's an interior. Yeah. So then that we are, I'm sorry, Tony, did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh, just, and hopefully as an audience member, you don't get too irritated by bagpipes.
Yes. Although it's excellent bagpipe playing though.
It is, but I'm not a fan,
right? Sure.
Yeah, and there's a lot of bagpipes in this.
So then we have somebody come in and tell him that Napoleon is on the move. He's back. He's free, and he is in the area. And Wellington gets really excited because he's like, I know this area like the back of my hand. He's like, I can't believe he's here. And they have a little powwow, And this is where the title of the film becomes relevant.
These 4 roads here.
Quatre Bras. He's bound to go for them, sir.
If we can't hold him there, I'll stop him here.
I will stop him at Waterloo. Tony, Waterloo is such a... Prior to the Battle of Britain, Waterloo was England's Battle of Britain war to discuss, or battle. It was like, you know, we stopped Napoleon in his tracks. And prior to that, it was the Spanish Armada, you know, victory. This is one of those keystone battles in British history and also the history of Europe. When you were growing up, you know, with your father, like what was the gravity that was given to this battle growing up? Do you recall?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, I'm trying to think how old I was the first time I ever went to London. It's not a trip that my family used to make often. I was probably, I grew up only about a bit over an hour away on the train from London on the south coast, but I was probably around 8 years old, I think, the first time my family ever took me to London. And one of the places my dad took me to was like the Wellington Monument. You don't have giant statues of people in the middle of cities because of something that's not, you know, it can't be overstated how important it is.
It's an amazing thing to see this, you know, dramatized in this way, and especially given its proximity as a movie production to Battle of Britain, because you're going, wow, the Battle of Britain, which all of these actors agreed to get paid scale because they felt like it was their duty to do this movie. They all wanted this movie to succeed. And then literally within 12 months of this movie, or 6 months or 10 months, whatever it was, they also mount this massive production of Waterloo. And it's like, gosh, guys, if you had done the Spanish Armada and the Battle of Hastings, you could have just knocked them all out. And, you know, you know what I mean? And also, of course, Agincourt. If you'd done all those, you'd have had all the keystone, you know, British battles. So
did you? I've got a. Did you find that clip you just showed before of Wellington? His final line, like, is, I don't know if it is intentionally humorous or not. I certainly giggled at it. There are a lot of moments in this film where I found the line delivery from Christopher Plummer didn't have me like rolling on the floor laughing, but would like either put a big smile on my face or would have me kind of giggling all the way through the film, right up until one of his kind of, I suppose, final lines, which, if there is anything of a character arc, there's a line he has at the end, which I'm sure we'll get to. But yeah, I don't know if that was deliberate or not, but I found the character to be quite humorous.
He was humorous, absolutely. But it was a very kind of like, it's the kind of thing that if you're not into dry, somewhat dark humor, you know, soldiers humor, I can see some people, especially in my neck of the woods, I can see some people walking away being like, he's an asshole, you know. That's you know, but but I did not find him offensive or anything like that. I like that twinkle in Christopher Plummer's eye when he delivers those kind of lines. I mean, I've got a lot of them pulled here as part of my clip show, but
I certainly wouldn't sort of say it was offensive in any way. I
didn't mean offensive.
There was the risk that it. I didn't find the character to be flippant.
Right.
But some of these jokes, some audience members may either think that the real character was a little bit flippant, or that just the portrayal of the character. Christopher Plummer is making this guy out to be some kind of, you know, so he's leading the entire British army and he's quite flippant about it.
Right. That's what I meant by that's what I meant by offensive. I didn't mean like existentially or philosophically offended. I meant more of this seems tone deaf to what his role is supposed to be. He seems to not care. He seems to be callous, you know. And that I didn't find it that. I think what they were trying to do, especially in a lot of moments, was maintain for the audience that separation between the officers in the British Army and the enlisted men, because they did start to define the enlisted men right after this. And there's one little scene here where the enlisted men are talking on the march, because now they've mobilized everybody and they're going to try and intercept Napoleon at Waterloo.
That's mad. It's all madness. They know what they're doing.
Look, I keep asking you, if Boney kicked the Prussians in the arse, why are we doing all the running?
A retreating army is hardly ever in love with its commander.
Right, sir.
And that's a perfect example right there, where they're watching them complain, but they're not really that worried about it. They're like, oh, retreating armies never like their commander, do they? And it's like, well, no, but also one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of British war films of any era is they always give time to the enlisted men and their attitudes toward things. I have found this to be the case in a lot of war films that I've seen that are set with the Brits, which gives you a nice counterbalance. You know how everybody's feeling kind of going into the big conflict. Okay. We are now at a point where I cannot remember if I did not get a clip of this, but to your point about Wellington's personality, one of the enlisted men finds himself a piglet and steals it from a farm and then puts the piglet alive in his backpack, fantasizing that he's going to have bacon in the morning or something, which is ridiculous. So, of course, Wellington sees him walking by, stops him, asks him to open his backpack. All the other high-ranking officers are around. And the guy just is now quaking in his boots. And if it wasn't pouring down rain, you probably would have seen him pissing himself, because he's like, you know what the punishment is for plundering, don't you? And he's doing that thing you're talking about, Tony, where he's got that twinkle in his eye. He's not reading him the riot act. He's like, and he's like, yeah, I heard that you take away our gin privileges. And he's like, no, it's death. And he's like, well, I was just trying to help this little piglet find his way back to his relations, sir. Like, he's freaking out. And Christopher Plummer says he just starts laughing. He's just like laughing. And the guy's like, what's about to happen? And he goes, you know what? He looks at all of his soldiers or his officers, and he says something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something to the effect of, there aren't many people who can so effectively defend a losing position. In other words, this guy's position is indefensible, and yet he is defending it admirably from where he is. And he just looks at the guy and he's like, you're a corporal now. And then he just walks off, and you're going, what the hell? Like, he is not a, like you said, he's not this, as in this film anyway, he's not a by the numbers start shirt dude. I mean, he knows what his rank and privilege are, and he likes his rank and privilege, but he's not a by the book kind of guy, I guess. And there's a really great line from that enlisted man just prior to that scene, when he actually comes across the piglet, and it's like he pulls it from underneath like a farm fence or whatever it is. He grabs the piglet and he's like, settle down, you, and behave, and I'll only eat half of you. Yeah, right. Just like, so just, it's like, how are you exactly going to do that on the march? Like, there's a great, for anybody who hasn't seen it, there's a great movie called Battleground. And it was made right after the war, and it's about the Battle of Bastogne. And I only bring it up to say there's a similar plot thread where a guy absconds with a bunch of eggs from a chicken coop, because he thinks what he's going to do is he's going to scramble them in his helmet over a fire, and then he's going to have scrambled eggs. And the gag through the whole movie is that every time they finally dig their foxholes in the snow, and then he gets ready to get his fire going, and he's got the eggs in his helmet all stirred up, they say, move out, we're moving, we got to go dig foxholes 500 yards that way. And he's like, oh my God. So he keeps having to hold his helmet like this, and stuff's falling into it. It's all disgusting. And I asked myself that when I saw this scene. I was like, what does he think he's gonna do with a live pig? Like, really? Like, Laser Pants, thank you for the super chat. He says, I have nothing interesting to say, just showing some support. Sir, you're too kind. Everybody, this is the mensch that runs the 3POA podcast. You should check it out.
Yeah. Ryan, if you were to turn around and say to me that you have seen this film, you would blow my mind.
Oh, man. So I'm going to play this clip now because, that's what this clip is. Okay. I have this bad habit, everyone, of labeling the clips to trigger my memory, and then they don't trigger my memory. So yeah. Then we get this moment with Christopher Plummer and Jack Hawkins, where Jack Hawkins is telling him, we shouldn't move our men back into the trees. It'll be suicide. And Wellington is like, I've been here before. And it's a pretty cool moment that I just had to play.
There's no undergrowth in that wood. You can drive a battery of 9-pounders. A whole army can slip through it like rain through a grate. It may surprise you to know, Picton, that I saw this ground a year ago. And I've kept it in my pocket.
I love that line. I saw this ground a year ago, and I've kept it in my pocket. And it's like, ooh,
great delivery.
Yeah, it's really, really good. It's like that's why he's so excited that Napoleon has walked into this area, because he's like, I know every single twig in this area. He's screwed.
Do you know what else is interesting? Another little note that I've written down here. This is the third film we've discussed on War Stories that stars Jack Hawkins. So he was in Zulu. He was on Bridge on the River Kwai. And now I didn't know he was in this. And then he popped up and I'm like, my God, is that Jack Hawkins?
Yeah.
Is this actor going to become to War Stories what the Mego Buck Rogers figure is to the broader RetroBlasting catalog?
I hope so. I do. Because Jack Hawkins is also in Lawrence of Arabia. So, it's going to be a great day. Him and, what's the guy's name? I know I would know his name if I wasn't trying to think of it. He was in all the war films in Britain back in the 40s and 50s. He was in Ice Cold and Alex and a bunch of other. He was the star of Ice Cold and Alex, and he was in everything back then. Oh crap! Somebody will say it in the chat. But he's another one that I hope will become. I hope him and Jack Hawkins become the mascots of this show. Okay, so I've 9-pounders. Yes, Bobby, 9-pounders are canon. Yes.
So John Mills is what everyone's saying.
John Mills. That's who I'm trying to think of. Yes. If Jack Hawkins and John Mills become the Statler and Waldorf of this show, I will be pleased as anything. All right. So now we have, and I'm doing that thing again. I'm saying so, but whatever. I don't care anymore. Wellington gets into a final meeting with his generals to discuss the strategy for the morning. They've holed up in a kind of, I don't know, they've billeted in a farmhouse or a small chateau or something. And the young boy, the young officer who was making eyes at his daughter and his daughter likes him, he noticed that officer had given his watch to, I guess it was his Batman or somebody. He gave his watch to somebody else. And as they're all dispersing after the meeting, this occurs.
Who did you give your watch to, Hay?
Somerset, sir.
Expecting to die tomorrow? I don't like those thoughts. Having them sometimes makes them come true.
There's a lot of movies, Tony, I want to ask you this question. There's a lot of movies where when it comes to war and the soldiers that deal with good luck charms and superstitions and things you do and don't do, luck, all that kind of stuff. They all interpret it a little differently, but it all kind of falls in the same lane. Is that a thing that you experienced as well when you were serving? Was a lot of guys with superstitions about not changing their socks or this and that?
Absolutely not. I think that may be the state of the modern British military. So you know, we all had, a lot of us would have a letter that, you know, we would write to the family back home, but it wasn't a case, you know, that you would give that to your best friend. That would be kept in your foot locker back at the base, and, you know, under you always knew when you were going out on an operation that should anything happen to you, the contents of your foot locker minus, you know, weapons and ammunition would normally get sent back to your family. So we would often, you know, remove pornographic magazines and things like that because you didn't want your family to come across that kind of stuff. But certainly, if in fact, there's a minor scene in Black Hawk Down, just prior to them, you know, mounting the helicopters to go in on the first raid, where a guy is taping his blood type. He's written his blood type on a bit of tape, and he's putting on his boots. And he's one of the Delta Force guys, and one of the Ranger guys says to him, "Oh, that's bad luck." And I'm like, no, in the modern military, I've never really come across that. It's
right.
Practical, and yeah.
Alejandro, I don't want you spreading rumors that I'm not going to watch something just because I don't have an interest in it. I'm not trying to chastise you either. I have said in the past that I tend not to read as many books about the Navy as I do about foot soldiers and the air wars and air combat. That is true, but it doesn't mean that I disqualify those movies from this series. So if Tony and I watch a movie about a battle like Midway or something like that, I will happily watch that movie and talk about it right here on this show, because they definitely count. I take nothing away from the Navy. I'm just probably like a cat human that doesn't like getting wet. So that's just, you know. King Eric, thank you for the super chat. He says, excellent stream. May I also recommend War and Peace, the Soviet 1965 version. Includes the largest battle ever filmed, Borodino. It's a bit long, over 7 hours. It's on HBO Max in 3 parts. 7 hours. That is a lot of movie to get through in 7 hours. That I could walk to Sarajevo in that time from Leningrad. This is crazy. That sounds wonderful. I think Tony and I would have to break that up into about 3 parts, like Band of Brothers. We did.
Yeah, very, very much so.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bit later in this film about, you know, Napoleon, 4 hours. Can lose the battle in 4 hours.
Yes. Yeah. I actually have a clip from that.
I'll just sit down and watch War and Peace, and then, oh, crap.
Yeah. It's like, oh, well, that was a quarter of my life wasted on this Soviet film. That was why the Soviets made their film so long, was because the longer people were in the movie theater, the longer they had before they tried to riot for bread. Quick, distract them. So we come to this trope that I bring up in this clip. It's a stylistic trope that goes throughout the film. And Melinda, if you're watching right now, you are not going to like this trope. There is a trope of inner monologuing through whispering. And it's either Napoleon or Wellington. They're whispering in their own head. And I just pulled a brief clip of this to give everybody an example.
I mustn't be sick. I mustn't be sick. I must have strength for tomorrow.
Happens constantly throughout not when I say constantly, I don't mean like incessantly, but very regularly throughout the film. And what you were seeing there was you're seeing Napoleon struggle with what we now believe was stomach cancer. He had not come down with, it's not like a cold. He had developed stomach cancer in his life, and he was starting to suffer the effects of it. So now sorry, Tony, go ahead.
So while Michael was talking about that trope of the whispering in a monologue, if anyone in the audience, I was struggling not to laugh there. Do you know, I think it must have been last weekend. I sat down and, as I often do, I think I want to enjoy a piece of RetroBlasting's back catalogue. And I sat down and I watched your Dragon Con presentation about 80s ninjas. Just last weekend by pure coincidence. When I started hearing the whispering inner monologue in this film, it took me right out of the film because I could just think about Chuck Norris going, ninja, ninja, ninja. Every time I could just picture, the mightiness of the ginger beard of Chuck Norris.
But they don't exist anymore. Like, it's just, it's so, and again, I'm not going to say that it wasn't well acted in this movie. I mean, it's Christopher Plummer and Rod Steiger. They're really, it doesn't undercut the film at all. It's woven in just like everything else. This film is not the Octagon. Okay. Now that very well might be not a good selling point for some of you in the audience. You guys might be like, well, I'd rather watch the Octagon. And you know what? To each their own. I watch them both. But in this film, it doesn't come off as cheesy, but it is a thing that keeps coming up. So if you don't like whispering, this may not be the movie for you. Just pointing that out. Now, we have our first big battlefield scope shot that I want to share with everyone. This is where the battle finally kicks in. And I think this whole battle is like, it's easily the last third of the movie, if not just over the last half. They don't mess around once this battle starts. I've got 2 scope of battlefield shots in a row to show you, and then we shall discuss. Doesn't matter where the camera points. There's thousands of people in every direction. It's crazy. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think from this moment on in the film, I watched the rest of this film just like that.
Yeah.
For anyone in the audience who hasn't seen this, if mine and Michael's chat today encourages you to go and watch Waterloo, please, please, please don't watch it on a phone or an iPad. Watch it on a large format TV in the best quality you can, because the scope of this film I'm sure that there was a couple of times where I'm like, is that a matte painting? Do you think there was any matte paintings used?
No, there were none.
There was one time where I was convinced there was a matte painting, and I'm thinking, I don't know why they would do that when the rest of the film didn't. So maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. But there's no optical effects, no matte paintings. A cast of 15,000 costumed extras. This outdoes the scope of Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, almost.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers was using digital effects to replicate the hundreds of extras they had to fill it all out, which I don't blame them for doing. I mean, you cannot mount something like this effectively.
No.
As we said at the beginning of this stream, the Soviet Union not only put up 15,000 of their own army men to do this, but they also physically changed the landscape of like 4 or 5 square miles of the Ukraine in order to replicate as closely as they could the topography of Waterloo. They planted a forest for this movie. Like they did all kinds of crazy stuff. They planted wheat. They planted in the right area. They planted some other crops in another area because it was around this farm. They did all kinds of stuff to make this look as close as it could. And like I said, even though some historians are like, oh, it's still not totally accurate. It's like, it's as accurate as any movie is ever going to be. Like, really. Here's another shot from the scope of the battlefield. I'm going to get demonetized for showing that, but I don't care because you have to see it. Like, it's just like, huh? Like, it unbelievable production value. Now, at this point, Tony, we have to have a brief discussion here because we talked about it a little bit before we started the stream. But this is where, and if anybody wants to be fickle and pithy and rip me apart in the comments for what I'm about to say, you're ripping apart someone who's always shown they're trying to learn. So that is on you. Or you can be cool about it and be like, cool, this guy's talking my jam. Let's all talk together and not judge each other. You've been warned. Okay. So I'm a purveyor of history and I know the broad strokes of the Napoleonic era. I'm not a Napoleonic student. Like, I don't study every single thing about it. I specialize in the RAF. I specialize in the Crusades. I have my wheelhouses, World War II. So I start hearing bits of dialogue in this from both Wellington and Napoleon talking about, I think Wellington's really worried about his right flanks. That's why he's put all of his cannons there. And, Wellington talking about how he wonders if the Prussians are finally going to show up like they said they would, because that'll help reinforce everything and whatever. But overall, the last 35% of this movie, whatever it is that this battle takes place in, I found it very difficult not to determine. I know why they're fighting there. They're fighting there to stop Napoleon from regaining his foothold in Europe.
Yeah.
Duh. Like, I get that. But as somebody who enjoys war films, I like to know what the weak points and bottlenecks of the battle are, what each general's challenges are, what challenges specific to that battlefield they're trying to surmount, while they also try and get one up on each other. And that was something in this particular movie I had a very hard time pinning down. I felt like I was, at that point, I felt like I was watching a movie that was catering to Napoleon history buffs and not the general audience, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I really struggled with it myself. And as the battle starts to play out, I get sort of 10, 15 minutes into it, I kind of just said to myself, sit back, enjoy the spectacle. England are fighting France, and I don't really know much of what else is going on.
Right.
There's that great scene in Band of Brothers. So they parachute in on D-Day. D-Day +1, they all get together at the farm and they have to go and capture or take out the guns at Breakhall Manor.
Yep.
And there's that brilliant scene where they're just in this little barn, Winters and a few of the guys, and on a piece of paper, he draws the trenches and the guns. And then they go there, and I'm like, you understand the geography of what's going on, what they're trying to achieve,
right,
the bottleneck, the challenges. And it makes that so much more of a thrilling visual experience, understanding that. I didn't get a lot of that in this. They try to put it across through dialogue, inner monologue. They're not kind of showing you that much on. There are a lot of maps in this film. There are maps laid out on tables, but no one's pointing at the map and kind of showing you my forces are here and Wellington's coming around. There isn't any of that. I just want to Deadeye 313 in the chat. This is from a few minutes ago when you showed the last clip. Says, I think those are miniatures. Those are not miniatures.
No.
I know it might be hard to tell, watching YouTube on a phone, but when you see this film, they're not miniature. The miniatures walk around and the horses are moving. It's
yeah, these are not. Those aren't miniatures. That is a crane shot of the entire area that they put together thanks to the Soviet Union's industrial construction workers and stuff and their military. They changed all of it for the purposes of this film.
Yeah, there's also a lot of helicopter shots in this, which I don't know when Hollywood. Well, I mean, this isn't exactly Hollywood, this one, is it? But I don't know when they really started using a lot of helicopter shots, but there's a lot of helicopter shots in this. Over, and I'm probably getting ahead of ourselves here, but it's over the top of a lot of like cavalry charges and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've got the
really,
shot.
really well filmed.
Yeah, I've got the shot to show. And just to give you an idea, there is a helicopter shot right at the end of Bridge on the River Kwai, where it's coming up away from the bridge. So that kind of gives you an idea. Yeah, the filmmakers seemed to have a better grasp of showing us how manic Napoleon was earlier in the film as a character versus what the exact challenges of this battlefield were going to be for these generals in real time. Like, you know, there's that scene early on where Napoleon is literally writing like 7 letters at the same time, and he's dictating them out to 7 different scribes. And, you know, he's going from a letter of condolence to a fallen soldier to a letter to a general about some orders to this to that. Like his memoirs, like he's all over the place. So you get a real good sense of who this guy is as a person. So it's odd that then we get to the battlefield for what the title of the film is, which is Waterloo, and suddenly things aren't as clear anymore. Like and I do feel like that took a little bit away from my ability to really connect with this part of the movie. I'm going to be straight up. I'm not saying, guys, I know that nobody can handle criticism of any kind anymore. Everything's either you love it or you hate it. That's not the case. RetroBlasting and Analog Toys don't play that. We still remember what subtleties and nuances are. So if I'm sitting here criticizing this little bit of the film, it's not me throwing the film in a fire and pissing on it. Okay. Like it's not what I'm saying.
Yeah. Let me put it to the audience this way. Because I didn't hate this. I actually, when this film finished, which I watched the last part of it last night, I actually sat down and went, I'm so grateful that I do this war story show with Michael, because I may have never sat down to watch Waterloo.
Mm-hmm.
And I got so much satisfaction from that film. What I didn't get, I don't feel like I actually learned much about the Battle of Waterloo.
Right.
If that makes sense. So it was a visual cinematic feast. I appreciated the costume design, the tour de force performance of Rod Steiger, Christopher Plummer's humor, the scope, the scale. I enjoyed all of that stuff, but I didn't learn much about the Battle of Waterloo.
Yeah. Like if you watch The Longest Day or you watch the Battle of Britain, you will have a very respectable primer for that moment in history. Yep. You really will. Yeah, there's still a lot to learn, and there's still some things that, you know, Hollywood had to fudge or whatever, but they're very minor in the grand palette of things. They show you the first thing taken is Pegasus Bridge, and then these things happen in this sequence. And same with Battle of Britain. The first attacks are on the radar stations with Stukas, but then this happens and blah, blah, blah. This, once the battle starts, it kind of becomes this miasma of visuals and atmosphere and amazing scope. But like Tony said, I wasn't learning much about how the battle shook out. I know it was a battle, and I know who won and I know who lost, and I know there was a farmhouse, and I know there was something about a right flank, and the Prussians showed up at just the right time. That's what I've learned. But beyond that, it is a little bit more vague. Again, it doesn't qualify this movie for being thrown in the oubliette, as Conrad would say. It's just simply, it's just simply an observation. Not every film sticks every landing. And this film was trying to stick a lot of landings. Okay, so we are now at the moment where the battle is going to begin. And there's another Christopher Plummer moment here.
Normally, I don't like cheering, but there's always a time to cut cards with the devil.
It's a good line. I'm going to put that one in my back pocket, that last part. There's always time to cut cards with the devil.
There is actually some really well written dialogue in this film. Some very there was a lot of memorable going all the way back to the ballroom scene. And you've got the officer who comes in to let Wellington know of, Napoleon. Well, when he enters the room, he's a little bit disheveled. He's in a bit urgent, and he's running through. And then one of the ladies in the room turns around and goes, "Well, that man's about to ruin the party," or something like that. And it's just this great line. It was like some of the dialogue is very, very well written.
Yeah, it really is. Jesse, don't throw things out there like that and not explain. This is War Stories. I can't be reading that and not know what you're referring to.
Yeah.
There's not
could also be talking to someone else in the chat. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. But I have to keep my eye on the chat. So when I see random stuff like that, it's like, form a complete sentence. Otherwise, I'm getting paranoid. The battle then begins as Napoleon makes this observation.
You can tell by the position of his guns, his might is on the right side. So that's what he's afraid of, is right.
So these were the little kernels, no pun intended, that I was picking up on about the battle. And I was really holding on to those going, okay, something about his right. But then I feel like that gets lost somewhere. And by the time you realize you haven't heard about it in a while, they never pick it back up. And so you're like, there was something about his right, but I don't know. The battle then begins. Stratego, the movie. Okay. Really, really, really impressive scope. Great camera work. There are no miniatures there. Like that's real people. And then we get some really great banter from the Brit soldiers again, which this is one of my favorite parts because the French army has formed up and they have decided they are going to call in advance. They're going to advance into the British lines and fight them. And so the British units are being given gin. They're passing out a little bit of gin before the first conflict. And it comes back to the guy who had the piglet and was then promoted to corporal. Yeah. And he's standing there and you can hear the footsteps over the hill of the French units coming. It's very much like the beginning of Helm's Deep, where Gimli can't see the orcs and he wants to know how many orcs there are.
Have a sup of gin. With His Majesty's compliments. Remind me to thank him next time we visit the palace.
Oh, do you say there are many of them?
Look, I'm not God, am I? To see through a hill.
I can't see through a hill. I'm not God.
Jason Anderson says, please tell me there is a Wilhelm scream somewhere in this film. Jason, I've actually got the Wilhelm scream written down in my notes because there's one scene where the French are coming through the trees towards, I can't remember the name of the, that there's a strategic defensive position. And as they're advancing, French soldiers are falling to rifle fire. And I counted 6 Wilhelm screams in a row. So, yes, sir. This may actually hold the record for the most frequent use of the Wilhelm scream.
Which could qualify this by default through a technicality as the greatest movie ever made. Because possibly, of how, Keith Knight, thank you for the super chat. He says, historians agree that the film is very accurate to actual events, especially battle and tactics. I have no doubt that's true. What I'm saying is, was it clearly explained to the viewer what was going on? Because even when you have things happening en masse, you can be filming an actual accurate recreation of the battle. But if I'm not able to follow it, then I can't feel tensions in this moment and that moment, and anything else. P.S. Michael, have you opened your parcel yet? I saw Tony open his parcel on camera on Patreon. And I felt like I was going to do you a disservice by not doing the same. So I'm going to be opening your parcel within the next day or so. I promise. I'm going to do it. I promise. I can't wait.
I think what would have really benefited this, as Keith said, and this very much goes along with the kind of the little bit of research that I did into the film, that historians do say that this was very, very accurate. But okay, I know the French are the guys in the blue jackets and the white trousers, and I know the British are the ones in the red jackets.
Yep.
But there's a lot of other regiments going, and I know, when someone's wearing a kilt, it's a Scottish regiment. I know that.
Right.
But when you see these epic shots, these enormous wide shots with all this stuff going on, this film really would have benefited from a scene with a bit of Basil exposition explaining, this is the French cavalry, these are the dragoons, that kind of thing. So when you see all these different colors going around, I was picking up most of it. There was very much a lack of explaining the geography of the battlefield to the viewer. So as much as it might be accurate, as you said, and unless you've read books about this, you might be sitting there going, looks beautiful, but I don't know what the hell is going on.
It looks beautiful, and I know who I feel like needs to win, so I hope they do win. But what makes a battle engaging is knowing the stakes hour to hour, minute to minute, knowing, so let's take Helm's Deep again, not to totally fictionalize everything, but in Helm's Deep, first we see how outnumbered they are, and so we know the stakes. Then we know that there's a weak spot in the wall and they've got to defend it. Then we know when that wall gets blown up, the stakes are now a lot higher. Then we know that the front gate gets blown open and they've got to hold that back and reinforce it. And so we know all the touch points. We know when we see those huge ladders going up, there's a new complication. There wasn't, and it's not about spectacle, it's about understanding. So like even in something as simple as the Pegasus Bridge sequence in The Longest Day, they're the first guys in early in the morning. They are surrounded, by potential German forces on either side of the river, and they're told, you have to hold this bridge until the forces from the beach get here and relieve you. When that will be, we can't tell you, but you're going to have to hold this down. And the challenge is going to be limited ammo, limited manpower, in the dark, surrounded. Good luck. And it's kind of like, okay, I get it. Whereas here, the only thing that I come away from it getting is, I hope Wellington beats Napoleon. There's a farmhouse in the middle that seems to be their kind of king of the hill objective. But minute to minute, I'm not sure where a challenge occurs or a tension rises and why. Yeah. That's the whole thing. And speaking of epic scope, I've never seen more horses than this shot. I've seen Lawrence of Arabia like 100 times. I thought I'd seen a lot of horses. That movie ain't nothing compared to this with horses. I just,
I'm pretty sure they were miniatures, Michael.
Oh, yep. Totally miniatures. They're digital effects. Yeah. And then this shot, this is the shot. This is two shots I've strung together that shows just how epic all of this got for the production. I feel like that Jackie Chan meme. What? Like, what? Like, I can't process the coordination of that kind of shot. I cannot figure out. Can you imagine if they had to do a take two?
I'm I imagine they very much would have had to have had military trained people on the production to help choreograph all of just the logistics of it all, and this company going here and this company going here. But I was just sitting there, and for that single shot alone, when all of that cavalry comes in, and then you have the different, I don't know if they're companies or battalions of the redcoats there, and they're in the square formation. That's the square formation. We still now in the British military, there's a reason that, the drill square outside company headquarters is a square. And they're in what they call all-round defense, where basically the command element of the company, which would, be an officer, a batman, an advisor, maybe 3 or 4 people in the middle, and then everyone else in a square facing outwards. So you don't have to worry about what's behind you because you've got a rank and file behind.
Right.
That is something that still to this day goes on, even in a very small, special forces patrol.
Right.
When you go into a defensive position, you have all-round defense. So that is minimum like 3 or 4 positions,
right,
facing north, south, east, and west. So I'm watching that, like all these companies are in. But I'm looking at it thinking, well, in modern military, we wouldn't do that, where the front rank of one of those companies could actually shoot the front rank of another company that's over there. But then I think, yeah, well, they're using muskets. They probably know that the musket ball's not going to go that far.
Yeah.
They have to wait till the cavalry gets close. But did you notice in this, long before, Braveheart, which, I'm talking here about people falling from horses and horses going down.
Right.
I know in Braveheart, they didn't actually hurt any horses. I suspect it would have been a film like this that started to see that change in movies.
Right.
There's a lot of horses get hurt here, and to me, they look like they get hurt for real.
It's right around the time that the horse accidentally got killed in Blazing Saddles. So I would imagine that this movie is one of those last films before they really ramped up restrictions on animal safety. And also because they were shooting this outside the United States and England to begin with, and they were shooting this in Russia or Soviet Union, Ukraine. There's no telling what kinds of regulations they were able to sidestep or ignore or whatever. I did see some trained horses doing your standard horse stunts, like looking like they were falling and then doing a somersault. And then you can actually see one toward the end do his stunt after an explosion as generals are talking in the foreground. And as the scene plays out, the horse sort of canters back into the scene, even though we just saw the horse and his rider die, which I found that very charming. Those particular horses obviously are very expensive because they're trained and everything else. So you don't want bad things happening to trained horses. But I did wonder how many horses that were not needing that kind of skill were just there and were accidentally hurt in some way or killed or whatever. Like, obviously, I don't think they put a horse on a landmine and blew it up or something. There's nothing like that. But I think accidents definitely happened on this shoot, and it did kind of make me wonder for a minute. WG, thank you so much for the kind super chat. He says, great review of a classic. Thanks. You are welcome, and thank you for the super chat. It's very kind.
I did so with the cavalry charges as well, that there's a number of different kind of cavalry charge shots that are filmed from the perspective of the cavalry commander. In this. So there's like a real close-up on the commander and then all this cavalry in the background. And back then you wouldn't have been able to tell, but I'm sure you noticed that the person in the foreground is actually not on a horse. They're probably standing in the back of a pickup truck.
Yep.
With the camera right there, and they're just being told, like, just do that.
Yeah. And they tried for a while, like they tried to make that technology better by having like a thing that sort of rocks them back and forth, but you can always tell it's not a real horse. And they used those in Lawrence of Arabia as well. It was a very common thing they did back then for Westerns and other films where they needed that one type of shot of the actor on horseback. And some filmmakers managed to get away with it. It's almost like some filmmakers knew how to film those inserts and others didn't. And so in some movies, you kind of go, well, that's the only way they could have done it. But it didn't look as bad as the film that more directors than not didn't know how to shoot those very well. And it was, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, you know, to my eye, it was very noticeable. I think if I was an audience member in 1970, I probably wouldn't have picked up on it quite as much. But I still kind of walked away from that going, even though I know that's going on, there are so many of those shots with a different person in the foreground and different cavalry behind them. I was just impressed by the sheer logistics of them being able to achieve that shot, of having that vehicle travel at the same speed as the cavalry are charging behind them. And you can see that, you know, the depth. There's not just like one row of cavalry. There are 2-3 ranks of cavalry behind them. It was very, very impressive.
Unbelievable. That it's been a long time since I've seen a movie this impressive in its scope like this. And I don't count things like modern films where their epicness comes from a lot of CGI garbage. Not that CGI can't be done well. It can be, but when you know that everything was in camera and they had to do all this in reality, that's unbelievable.
What's happening? Can I leave the field for a minute? What's he doing there? How can a man go forward with the cavalry without infantry support? What's the matter with you?
Napoleon has a kind of stomach cancer flare-up, and he needs some Pepto-Bismol. And he gets taken back, and while he does, the generals kind of use some artistic license. They make some decisions. They take the initiative, and that's why you see all those horses running between the squares. And that's when Napoleon kind of comes back to the battlefield, and he's like, "What are you doing? You've screwed up everything." But he still believes that he's going to win this battle. Around this time, Wellington witnesses the fate of his daughter's boyfriend.
Think of England! Think of England!
I put that there because I don't mean this in any sort of awful way, but when he died, I was like, oh, thank goodness. That character just annoyed me. I don't know why. I was just like, get rid of him. So get this over with.
I mean, it's another one of those tropes where, you know, when you're making a war film, you have to show the futility of war, the damage that is done.
Right.
Yeah, there's another scene which I hope you have this clip of Waterloo's on his horse, and I can't remember who the guy is on the horse next to him. And you don't see his leg get blown off, but they talk about it.
Yeah. When Wellington, the reason I wanted us to describe that scene because it takes so long for it to build that I knew that YouTube would be. So let's describe that scene. So it's Wellington and one of his generals it's the Scottish no, is it the Scottish general? No.
I think so. Yeah.
And they're sitting on their horses together. Take it away.
Yeah, and there's kind of and this is later on into the battlefield, and the tide is starting to turn, and they're kind of overseeing things, and there is a barrage of French artillery fire. And while the two gentlemen are kind of, and this has already happened a number of times throughout the latter half of the film, where the cannonball will land, there'll be a big explosion right in front of the actors, and then the scene just continues to play out. But in this one, there was this big explosion right in front of them. They keep talking, and Wellington just sort of turns to him and he says, "But by gosh, man, you've lost your leg." So,
yeah.
And he looks down. He says, "Well, yes, Yes, I have. He just he falls off the horse.
And I love the fact that as he's falling off the horse, Wellington grabs him and pulls him to him a little bit, and then you see all these other guys rally around to try and Wellington's almost like, I've got him, keep away. You know, there was almost like that moment where the stakes of the battle were sinking in for him. Like this particular battle it's going to be a hard won engagement. Like this one, we're not going to walk away from with our sabers gleaming in the sun. Like this one's going to be ugly. And I loved that moment. And I was fighting, trying to figure out a way to edit that into a clip that would have impact. I couldn't do it. That's why I wanted us to describe it, because I want people who are interested in this to just watch that scene. Like it's extremely good. And it is shocking because the guy maintains his own officer's decorum as only the British can. And he's like, I've lost my leg. And he's like, you have lost your leg. Yeah. And he's like, you know, and then he catches him, you know, it's like, dang, like, and it's not like a Private Ryan thing where they show it. It's just all on their faces as the performers that sells it. It's like, it's almost more effective that way in many respects.
Yeah, and then the scene is very much just that's done onto the next. They don't linger on it, but it certainly it was one of the more standout moments of the movie for me. Definitely,
definitely standout moment for me too. King Eric the Greatest, thank you for the super chat. He says, Michael, if the French had Ewoks on their side, do you think they would have won? They can defeat elite troops after all. Well, I honestly don't want to. I honestly don't want to compare stormtroopers that can't hit the broadside of a barn to 19th century English and Prussian soldiers. There is a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I just don't think Chief Chirpa could face off against somebody, you know, with a bayonet this long. And like, I just, you're talking fur nuggets at that point. Like there's no way. There's no way that's going to happen. All right. So then we come to what I've dubbed the final trap.
Now, Maitland! Now's your time!
This is where my maximum confusion came from that we were talking about earlier, Tony, because I knew from earlier in the battle that they saw the Russians. They were Russians, but they saw the Prussians on the horizon, and they were like, "Oh, finally, they're here. They're coming. They're going to get here." And there's this hilarious bit of subterfuge where it cuts to Napoleon and General O'Hurley, and he says to him, "It's the Prussians, sir." And he goes, "I know it's the Prussians." He says, "But as far as the rest of the generals in our army thinks, they might as well be on the moon. Just as far as they know, they're not here because it's going to take them a little while longer to actually get here. So we're not going to burden them with this." Meanwhile, Wellington is like, "Well, I hope they get here soon." There's like moments where he's like, "I hope they get here in time, you know, because we're running out of ammo and we're running out of this and we're holding, but we need them to really finish this off, and we don't have them here yet." So you've got this moment here where suddenly he says, "Now, Maitland," and they all start jumping up out of the wheat, and I'm going, did I miss a scene? And then I joked to myself in my head. I was visualizing, have those guys been laying in the wheat for the last 10 hours waiting for this moment to happen? Like, that can't be right. They had to have been moved over there at some point. Like something, they had to have said something and had an order and said, "Get over there," and then hunkered down. And you go, well, they're in a wheat field. There's no tree. Wouldn't Napoleon and his guys have seen this huge phalanx of dudes walking over into a wheat field and just laying down? And it's like, what's that? And what? Oh, that's the area they've designated for nap time. Those are napping soldiers. We don't need to worry about them. It was very confusing. I was like, how long have those soldiers been laying there? And how did that?
I've had very much the same kind of thought process. When that happened, I very much went, have I missed a scene somewhere?
Right.
I think what the filmmakers were trying to do, they were trying to maintain the surprise, but rather than a surprise, you just go, what the hell?
Right.
Rather than, I suppose, if you had have set that scene up, you know, the audience would be sitting there knowing what's about to happen.
Yeah.
But by not setting it up, you just go, okay.
Now, HGC says it brings it back to the Brits lying down on the backside of the ridge after Wellington ordered them to get out of the artillery barrage. Which, okay, that's great. I'm glad that's explained. The trick is it's much like when Napoleon says he's worried about his right. That is said once, and then it's never followed up on again. You forget about that. And then suddenly when you see it again, it feels totally random and you're disconnected from the original thing. So I'm going, okay, brings it back to the Brits lying down on the backside of the ridge after Wellington ordered them to get out of the artillery barrage. I know he ordered a bunch of people to move back. I remember that. But to me, standard operating procedure isn't move back, and when you get far enough back, lay down and take a nap. Like, I know that's not what but what I'm saying is, when were they ordered to then lay down and become a surprise later? I thought he was just trying to preserve his men from getting needlessly hurt, and then he could bring them forward. So there's a little bit of disconnected tissue here in the shooting of the battle. But I appreciate the explanation. Yeah. The French generals falter.
Son, remember that you're a general. The Prussians are too late. You understand? Too late. Wellington is beaten. I've been in this position before at the Battle of Marengo. I lost the battle at 5 o'clock, but I won it back again at 7.
So the Prussians have shown up. They're reinforcing the English. The French generals are now rattled. And Napoleon is going full manic, just like he did at the beginning of the movie, where he's like, this doesn't mean anything. We're not beaten. We can still do this. I've done it before. And the generals are probably all thinking, yeah, but okay, so we get out of here with 7 survivors and we've won the battle, but then what? Like, you know, this is a lost cause at this point.
Where did you murder, Your Grace?
Help to God. I fought my last battle.
Bring it back to what you were talking about, Tony, when the guy lost his leg.
Yeah.
Wellington is over this. He's like, this has been horrible. Like all the joy that he had in finding out that Napoleon was walking into his tactical backyard at the beginning of the film, it's all washed away. And even though they've now got the last surviving Napoleon soldiers in their own square, being picked off in droves, and they're surrounded, and they've got Prussian reinforcements, he's taking no joy in any of this at this point. I found that to be very...
It's also some of the best shot scenes of the film. I'm when it cuts away there from Waterloo to the French in their square, and their uniforms are smoke stained and there's fire in the background. I looked at that and went, that looks like a gorgeous military painting, the kind of which I've seen in books and in museums, and so well executed.
Yeah, it really looked authentic. Like it was, it's like, and we're getting some explanations here, and I very much appreciate the explanations on this. Deadeye says, in the real battle, they were hiding behind a ridge line to protect them from artillery. When the French came over the ridge, they got blasted. And then in HGC says, Wellington had done this maneuver before during the Peninsular Campaign as well. So, okay, so this was an old trick. He kept it in his back pocket, to quote a great man. And then, yeah, you're right, HGC. This is totally lost in the editing. In some ways it is. I bet you if I watch the film 50 times, and that's not sarcasm like I have with Lawrence of Arabia or Longest Day, some of it would come out a little better. But yeah, it's a little muddled.
Yep.
And so then we have after that officer had said, I feel like we're committing murder. And then he says, I just want this to be my last battle. I want this over with. I don't want to do this anymore. We have this moment where Wellington is like, let's not kill anybody else. Let's just let these guys surrender. Let's give them that option.
You have done all that the honor of war requires. Will you agree to surrender? Merde!
Napoleon is shuttled away from that while that square is forming up and the other surviving generals know that the battle is lost. They shuttle him out of there as fast as they can because they know that they don't want the Prussians and the English to capture him. They do not want Wellington to get his hands on him. So he's not even in the square when his zealous men all decide they're not going to surrender. Even though Wellington was giving them a gracious surrender offer, he was just like, there's a line I had to cut there for the purposes of YouTube, but he says, General Wellington understands that you have done all that you can, and he does not want to see you give up your lives in vain, or something like that. He's like, surrender now, and you'll be treated fairly, or something like that.
Yep.
And they're like, no. And it just gets back to that thing we're talking about people who hitch their wagon to a conquering personality, and then they all get swept up in it, and you lose all sense of perspective and common sense. And that was really gut-wrenching to watch. I was really hoping that those French guys would, say, okay, because it's established in the film that anything that Napoleon does, the international community, wasn't called that back then, but Prussia, Belgium, and England do not hold France responsible. So they are not going to be holding France to task for what Napoleon has done. And so those soldiers had a way out, and they chose death. And it was just like, I just don't see anything noble about that, because their fearless leader got shuffled out of there minutes before, so he wouldn't have his ass handed to him. I don't know where I'm going with this thought. I'm just grumpy about it. So,
yeah. I mean, there are some people in the chat here saying that that last stand scene is fictitious and controversial. I kind of to try and put myself in the shoes of the French soldier. Let's say it was factual. I don't know. I'm not that much of a Napoleonic War historian. But let's say it was factual. There is the potential that the French soldiers actually fear what's going to happen to them if they surrender. And that could be worse than, I don't know.
Right. Well, after that, Napoleon just kind of stands around with his surviving generals at night in a burned out cottage and sort of cries in the rain. And that's really the end of the film. I walked away from this film knowing that I'll never forget its scope, and being fascinated by the production story behind it, and also how well performed it is. Rod Steiger and Plummer, everybody in the movie, but especially the two central characters, they really give great performances. Is it an event for me that is as close to home as something like even Cromwell? Like, I very much enjoyed watching Cromwell with Richard Harris and Alec Guinness. I've watched that several times. Probably not, but I understand that the result of Waterloo had a massive rippling impact on the history of Europe that is still felt today. I recognize that completely. But as a film, I feel like the film for me is more of I'm really glad I've now experienced this from a film academia standpoint, rather than from a profound historical experience kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't mean to sound like some, you know, flannel wearing coffee house misanthrope or anything like that. I don't mean to sound like that at all. I am moved by war stories. That's why we're doing this. And I think this movie's very effective in most of its execution. It's just, there's a little bit of something missing in the battle part itself. Something that doesn't connect it together.
Yeah. There's that. And I already mentioned it. If anyone hasn't seen this film and they're going to go and watch it on the biggest screen possible. You know, if you've got a 55-inch TV, watch it on that. Don't go watch it on your phone.
Right.
I will be forever grateful for experiencing the scope of this film. Is it a film that I really want to go back and rewatch? Not really. And as good as the performances are, you have the vast majority of the focus is on Napoleon, and then probably 2/3 on Napoleon, 1/3 on Waterloo, and then, you know, the odd one or two generals beside them. I kept in my head thinking, I've probably watched Zulu 100 times in my life. Why have I watched Zulu 100 times and appreciated this film is in even way bigger scope than Zulu, way bigger. But I don't have any desire to watch this again. I was like, it's because of the characters in Zulu.
Yeah.
The character, the relationships between the officers, you know, in that I would almost say there's a character arc with Hook, even though, you know, we know that the character is not portrayed as he actually was. You know, there's a lot of sort of a lot of liberties taken with that character. But do you remember when we did the episode on Zulu? And at the end there was the line from Stanley Baker's character about where he turns around, he says, "Do you think I could stand this butcher's yard more than once?" And that was him admitting to Bromhead that was actually his first ever battle. Bromhead had assumed he'd been in battles before. There's a line at the end of this film from Christopher Plummer, Waterloo, and I'm paraphrasing. I know I'm not going to get it exactly correct, but he basically said, "The only thing as sad as a battle lost is a battle won."
Yeah,
and that to me was the closest thing we got to any kind of a character arc. We had this guy who had these little throwaway lines throughout most of the film that were making me giggle, and then this very, very poignant line right at the end. Yeah. It's definitely worth a watch, this film, but you'll probably only ever watch it once. I don't know.
That's certainly the way I kind of look at it. Is I'm glad I've seen it, and I'm glad I own it if I want to go back and study some of the shots and study some of the production design for sure. Yeah. And again, I love the performances in it. But yeah, it's missing something, and I know that reviews both at the time and now indicate that they indicate that. When I say they indicate that, I don't know if they say that specifically, but I know that reviews at the time of this movie when it was released were lukewarm. It was like, you know, it wasn't the runaway success that Dino De Laurentiis was hoping for. It's a very, very competently made film, and yet it also proves that scope in a war film is not everything. You can throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at a movie with money, but if you don't have that little spark of what you need to connect it together for the audience, it doesn't matter how big it is. You know, Rourke's Drift was much smaller in engagement than Waterloo, and yet when you watch Zulu, you know the stakes, you know the risks, you have you're following the tension right along with the main characters. You feel their fear, you feel their suspense, you feel their hopelessness, you feel all of it together. Whereas in this, I see the amazing battles, and I see the amazing costuming, and I see the great performances, but I don't know what I'm supposed to be feeling, and I don't know from one minute to the next I don't know, with that connective tissue is missing that allows me to follow the story from 1 minute to the next, because I don't have anything to feel. It's a very strange thing to try and describe.
There's sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's that scene in Zulu just prior to the first battle, where you've got the Boer, and using his bayonet, he draws in the sand, the horns and the loins of the buffalo, and he explains to the British officer. He's not really explaining to the British officers; he's explaining to the audience so that we understand.
Right.
When this battle starts, these are the risks. This is what's going. This is the potential danger. That's the scene that was potentially missing from Waterloo, I think.
Yeah. Tony Roble, thank you for the super chat. He says, great to see you both on a stream. Keep cool. We shall.
Thank you, Tony.
Will Cromwell be a future war stories? Yes, it will. No mention of how Jack Hawkins dies when they shoot his top hat. Well, Alejandro, we can't literally mention every detail, or else this will be a 7-hour stream. We have to pick what we focus on. A lot of people in this movie die. Let's see. Just looking here. And Alejandro says, it doesn't help that Zulu is a David versus Goliath story, whereas Waterloo is about armies of the same size and strength fighting each other. There's that, but the aforementioned movies like The Longest Day managed to relate the stakes of the battle far more effectively. I would compare my feelings about Waterloo as a movie to my feelings about A Bridge Too Far as a movie, in that you got your dates and times and your when, where, why, and how. But there's something missing there where I'm not quite feeling everything that's happening. Like, I'm feeling some of it, just like I did with this movie. I feel some of it, but not enough that gets me over the fence, where I'm like, okay, not in the way Zulu did, not in the way Lawrence of Arabia does, not in the, you know what I mean? Not in the way Band of Brothers does, not in the way 12 O'Clock High does. There's something about this film that keeps you at arm's length. And that's the problem with Band of Brothers. Or not Bridge Too Far, not Band of Brothers. Band of Brothers is perfect. Bridge Too Far. A Bridge Too Far and this movie kind of have the same arm's length problem. There's something there. Like in A Bridge Too Far, and I know we haven't done that movie yet, but in A Bridge Too Far, I can name 3 sequences where I feel something, and the rest of it, I feel like I'm just watching kind of a telesnap series of events. And this was kind of that way too. So, well, what is our next? I guess it's going to be Platoon. Is that right?
It is. The audience has been asking for it for a long time. And have you got the 4K yet?
I think it's coming out this week. So if it's not already, it might already be out this week. It might have come out yesterday, which means I need to get my ass over to Amazon and get it. So, but yeah, it should be out this week, or maybe it was last week.
Yeah, the audience, I think that's our most requested discussion, is actually Platoon, from what I've seen anyway. But as you know, we like to jump around time periods. So this is this is going to be our first venture into Vietnam. So we're going to look at Vietnam, and then you never know where me and Michael will go after this. It could be anywhere.
Oh, it could be anywhere. I would love for us to finally find some sort of medieval movie to do, or with a real battle.
Well, I'm scared to tackle Kingdom of Heaven.
Me too. That's why I said medieval movie. I'm not committing to Kingdom of Heaven just yet. I know that there are other movies about medieval battles. It's just a matter of which one we do. So, I wish there was one that was small, but all the medieval movies are epic. It's like, I'll think of one. I'll think of one somewhere, and we'll do it.
Definitely.
Well, everybody, thank you for joining us tonight on our return to War Stories. Again, we never. Some people got worried that War Stories had ended, and it wasn't ended. We just, after Iconicon, had a hard time getting our schedules to line back up, but now we're back on track. So, we're not George Lucas. We're not going to make you wait 16 years for a sequel to War Stories.
You know what I was thinking yesterday? Like, we ended up kind of taking a break because I traveled over to the States for kind of 3 weeks and then needed a couple of weeks to get things sorted when I got back. And then we couldn't get stuff to line up, and we nearly went ahead last week, but you went to the, how was the toy show in Florida anyway? Good.
It was fine. It was a really good show as far as meeting people, everything like that. Matt did a really good show.
Yeah.
I didn't end up selling very much, but that's okay because, you know, that wasn't why I was there. I got to meet a lot of great people who love our channels and they wanted me to say hi to you. And so, yeah, it's good overall. Anyway, please continue.
Yeah. So I just thought, because we've kind of taken this extended break, we could almost look back and go, that was season 1 of War Stories.
Yep.
This is episode 1 of season 2 tonight. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And season 2, episode 2 will be Platoon. So,
good times, Big Pie.
Definitely.
So, yeah. Well, that will be Platoon on the next War Stories, everyone. In the meantime, thank you for being here. And thanks, Tony, again for doing these with me. So it's always so much fun.
My pleasure. I really enjoy these. So yeah, thanks for having me.
I do too. All right, everybody. We will see you on Platoon. And in the meantime, watch the channels for new video drops between now and the next War Stories, which will be in 2 weeks. So we'll see you then. Bye, everyone.
All right.
Bye.